We continue with our series of godly character in the milk of faith. And what we are going to do now is to have a look at everything from the fifth word or the fifth commandment on. Yeshua uses a parable to speak about what you must do so that you do not commit adultery and that you do not covet and that you do not steal. There are deeds that go along with that, and he grouped them together for that reason. Heard that our fathers were told, do not murder, and that everyone who commits murder will be subject to judgment. So everyone who has to murder the subject to judgment means that he has to be taken to court. But I tell you that anyone who nurses anger against his brother will be subject to judgment. How do you know that you nurse anger against your brother? You know it for the first time when you start ignoring him. So Yeshua is actually telling us that it is murder if we start ignoring a brother. Whoever calls his brother you good for nothing will be brought before the Sanhedrin. If one translates the Greek directly back into Hebrew, this actually says anyone who does Lashon Hara. Lashon Hara means a bad tongue, and that means gossip. So whoever gossips about him will be brought before the Sanhedrin, which is the high court of Israel, the highest court of Israel. And whoever says fool incurs the penalty of burning in the fire of Gehinnom. Now, Gehinnom is the Jewish equivalent of purgatory. But one needs to understand that it has nothing to do with purgatory at all, because this is expulsion out of the community of Israel. So if you call someone a fool, you will be expelled from the community. And these are actually the steps of what the severity of murder is in Yeshua's eyes, is that we are not to do this in any way, shape, or form, that we are not to commit this murder. Because look, how does this become murder? It is murder when I ignore my brother because I'm cutting him out of my life. When I start gossiping about him, I'm cutting him out of other people's lives. And when I call him a fool, I'm cutting him out of the nation. So that's rough. So if you're offering your gift at the temple altar and you remember there that your brother has something against you, leave your gift where it is by the altar and go make peace with your brother, then come back and offer your gift. Here is something that actually loops back. So if you're offering your gift at the altar and remember that your brother has anything against you, he is nursing anger against you. So if you see that your brother is nursing anger against you and you come to bring your gift, your sacrifice, because it's sacrifices that go to the temple altar, don't do it. Don't bring that gift, because if your brother sees you, he's going to say you're a hypocrite. And he says, leave your gift where it is by the altar and go and make peace with your brother. Then come back and offer your gift. So he's saying, go sort this out with your brother. He says, do not ignore others, do not gossip, and do not despise others. And he says this in the context of do not murder. And the interesting thing about this is what he is doing here. He's actually quoting two of the great sages of Israel that lived before him. He is quoting a sage by the name of Hillel and another one by the name of Shammai. The sages who lived together and who were part of Israel together. Now, it is known that Hillel was a sage for the love of God. And this is an exposition, this about murder is from Hillel, because he says, if you love God, you do this. The next thing that we're going to talk about is about adultery. And then he takes out of the teachings of Shammai, because Shammai was there for the fear of God. So they're much more strict in their keeping of the laws. And one knows that this is what it is about, because when you go back, because all of these writings still exist. If you go back to all of these writings and you interrogate them, Hillel and Shammai were speaking about murder when they spoke about this. You have heard that your fathers were told, do not commit adultery, but I tell you that a man who even looks at a woman with the purpose of lusting after her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye makes you sin, gouge it out and throw it away. Better you should lose one part of you than have your whole body thrown into Gehenna. And if your right hand makes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. Better that you lose one part of you than have your whole body thrown into Gehenna. So he says, do not commit adultery. But then he's not speaking about married men now. He's speaking about people. And he's saying that I tell you that a man who even looks at a woman with the purpose of lusting after her. So that if a woman's looks, or if a woman's, if what you want to do with women is what attracts you, you have already committed adultery with her in your heart. And this is saying something incredibly important, because it says that if you transgress this law and you commit adultery by sleeping with her before you get married, you have committed adultery with the woman that you are going to marry already, even if you marry her, because you will never be able to create a good relationship with her, because your relationship will be based on other things than on her person. So if it is about money, about lusting, about looks, about power that men have, about whatever, if there's any other reason that you look at a woman than looking at what she is inside, you must know that you will be running into a divorce. And understand that divorce is not only the word divorce, but there are people who live in divorce because they're in such bad relationships with you. And then he says, if your right eye makes you to sin, so you look at a woman, your eye makes you to sin, then you gouge it out and throw it away. But this is illegal. And then he says, if your right hand makes you sin, cut it off and throw it away. So if you commit adultery, if you look at a woman, or if you commit adultery, just get rid of this. This is not to be part of Israel at all. And you know, you're not allowed to cut off your hand, and you're not allowed to gouge out your eye, because that maims you. And if you're maimed, you're not allowed to go up onto the Temple Mountain. So this is actually saying that if your spiritual eye is bad and you sin, get rid of it. And then if your hand is bad, get rid of your hand and get another one. Get rid of your eye and get another one. Start looking at people because of what they are as people. Start doing to people not what you want, but what God wants you to do to them. So it is very obvious that he is rather strict about this. So these are the things that I've then alluded to. And this is in the context of do not commit adultery. So you can see how much stricter he makes it than it is written in the law. And therefore, you can see this context that says that this was a rabbi who lived in fear of God who wrote this. Now remember that adultery is also a spiritual sin. Then it says, it was said, whoever divorces his wife must give her a get. Now, the Jewish way of divorcing is if you want to divorce your wife, you have to write a letter of divorce, and the letter of divorce cancels the so-called ketubah. Now, understand the ketubah is the Torah, and it also is the marriage contract between God and man. Because when people are not living according to that, they are living in adultery because they are in idolatry. And then he says, if you divorce your wife, you must give her a get. So the get cancels the marriage contract, the ketubah. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of fornication, makes her an adulteress, and that anyone who marries a divorcee commits adultery. Because someone who has been divorced is in a situation, unless they change massively, that divorce will happen again. And that is actually borne out because 60%, 40 to 60% of modern people get divorced. Of those who then remarry, 60 to 70% get divorced, and those who get remarried a second time, 80 to 85%. So you see, it actually just builds on itself, and therefore it is a very evil thing. Yeah. But he's actually saying this is how we are to live. Now, if you look at the strictness of what Yeshua is saying here, you can actually say, but he says that the Pharisees bind together heavy loads for the people to bear. What is this? Of course, this is a heavy load, but he says, my load is light and my yoke is soft, because he says to us that we must cast all our loads on him. That means that these heavy things that we need to do are borne by the Spirit, and we will never be able to do it if the Spirit does not empower us to do these things. Matthew 25, 23 to 26. So if you're offering your gift at the temple altar and you remember there that your brother has something against you, leave your gift where it is by the altar and go make peace with your brother, then come back and offer your gift. So there's go make peace with your brother. And if someone sues you, come to terms with him quickly while you and he are on the way to the court. Or he may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the officer of the court, and you may be thrown in jail. Yes, indeed, I tell you, you will certainly not get out until you have paid the last penny. Now, this whole thing about bringing the gift to the altar, if your brother has anything against you, remember also that taking a loan from your brother is going to have something against you if you don't pay. So he says, leave your gift there at the altar, go and make peace with your brother. Go and make an arrangement with him. Just go make an arrangement with your brother. If it's money, go make an arrangement. If someone sues you, why would someone sue you? It's because you owe him something. Then they say, just sort that out. Sort it out fast. So it's saying, don't make debt. If you make debt, work out the terms. Work out the terms before you need to go to court. If you do not have money to pay for what you need to tell your brother you cannot pay for this and you do not think you'll be able to pay for it in future. Because there's another thing that is said, and that is that if anyone asks anything of you, give it to him. So that if your brother really needs something and he comes to you and he says, I can't pay, but I need this, then this starts setting the backdrop for Yeshua to say that's in order. So he says, you'll have to repay everything. What is he talking about in terms of the 10 Commandments? That is easy to see. Pay your debt or arrange payments. The opposite, and what this is dealing with, is do not steal. Because you are stealing, if you do not pay a laborer his money when he leaves in the evening or at the end of the week or at the end of the month. You are stealing when you are borrowing and not returning. You are stealing when you're picking up something in the street and you're not going to lengths to find out whose it is. And all of these things allude to stealing. So one should not be doing this. Again, you've heard that our fathers were told, do not break your oath and keep your vows to Yudeva. But I tell you not to swear at all, not by heaven, because it is God's throne, not by the earth, because it is his footstool, not by Jerusalem, because it's the city of the great king. And don't swear by your head, because you can't make a single hair white or black. Just let your yes be a simple yes and your no be a simple no. Anything more than that has its origin in evil. Now, he's alluding to all of these vows that were being made. And all of these vows were being made in Israel. People were swearing by God's throne, they were swearing by the earth, they were swearing by Jerusalem, and they were swearing by their head. And Yeshua says, there is no point in this. Let your yes be yes and your no, no. And do not break your oath. So he's saying, keep what you say. And he ends up by saying, it's not only your oaths that you must keep, but whatever you say, you must stay with. Because your yes must be yes and your no must be no. So that means that you may bring no false witness. Can you see how it ties into each other and how it continues to tie into each other? Now, there's one commandment that Yeshua doesn't speak about at all, and here it is. The 10th word. He says, if your right eye, the 10th commandment, if your right eye makes you sin, gouge it out and throw it away. If your right hand makes you sin, cut it off and throw it away. Can you see how this talks into do not covet? Because looking at a woman, your eye. Looking at something that someone else possesses and wanting it, it's your eye. So you see, it's the eye, the eye, the eye, the eye, and the eye that are being addressed. And then because that alludes to stealing, that alludes to coveting, and that alludes to adultery. And then when he speaks about the hand, it speaks into stealing, and it speaks into adultery. So you can see how Yeshua used everything at his disposal to explain to people how they were to live to truly keep the 10 words. Yeah, I think that you've noticed one thing, and I think that you've noticed that I started off with the 5th word and not with the first, and with the 5th. And the reason for that is when you start looking through it and you find 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and you just find that the order is reordered, what you actually know is that Yeshua is speaking about the 10 commandments. So when you then go into the next phase and you start looking at the first 4 words, you will actually see that those are the Beatitudes. And the Beatitudes come just before this. And then the Beatitudes speak into the first 4 commandments in a very special way. And by doing that, Yeshua is doing something that is considered to be utterly rabbinic, and that is that he puts a hedge around the law. And this is a hedge around the law, but it also is much more than this, because it tells us what love is. Because consider this. If instead, if father and mother were to teach children this way, the relationship between father and mother and children would be amazing, and they would have an amazing family. Then, in the next instance, if people were never to nurse anger against their brother, and ignore their brother, or they were never to speak badly, and they were never to damn a person by calling him an idiot, they would be ultra loving people. If a person doesn't look at a woman to desire her, then that person would be busy with people because of what he sees in the woman. But there's a second part to this that is a little bit more subtle. It doesn't fit into the commandment of do not commit adultery. But the opposite of adultery is absolute fidelity. Then it means that living in absolute fidelity with people means that you should not be looking at what they look like and what they have and what their abilities are to decide whether you are going to be related to them. You must be related to them because of them, and that becomes absolute fidelity. And then he says that if you bring your gift to the altar and you find out that your brother has something against you, go and fix it up with him. If you're owing him something, fix that up. Make an arrangement, pay the debt. If you make debt, pay your debt. Don't make debt. Make arrangements to pay the debt. If you can't pay the debt, go and speak to the person and tell him the problem, tell him how you can repay. If you cannot repay at all, tell him you cannot repay at all. But be totally honest with him, because anything else is stealing. If you have to pay someone a salary, the salary has to come before your own, and it has to come before your families, because that person is dependent on you, and that person has sold his time and his energy and his work to you. You have to remunerate him. If you don't, you're stealing from him. If you borrow from a person and you don't give it back, you're stealing. And if you pick up something in the street that belongs to another person, you must do everything in your ability to find the owner, even if you keep that thing with you until 20 years later, and you then find out who the owner is. You go to the owner and you say, I found this in the street, these were the circumstances. And then he says, don't look at things to desire them at all, because you won't get yourself in trouble. That is the 6 commandments of the second table of the law, and the way that Yeshua expects of us to live it in a loving way.
I think with what we are living in the New Testament, being empowered by the Holy Spirit, the requirements befits, say, followers of the Lord with the Holy Spirit, as say opposed to those who didn't have that.
Yes, you're very right, Herman. And what is more, the Jews actually live this. And if they don't live it, their community frowns on them. But it's because of fear of the law. It's not because the Spirit helps them to do it. And that is totally different from us.
Yes, it's true.
The mark of the beast, it's on the hand and on the forehead.
Same place, forehead on the hand.
Yes. And the mark of God is to deal with your children and with your firstborn and remind them of the Passover, remind them of Yeshua dying, in other words, and remind them of Shavuot, in other words, the Spirit being poured out, and remind them of Sukkot, which is when the Messiah is to come again. So this is actually, it is an entire thing. So that is why they wear these frontlets, these little black boxes on their foreheads and on their arms that look so silly. But there is something incredible, because those 4 texts that I read are in there, and they actually tell you exactly how to deal with your children. But then these tefillin have bands that hang down. From the tefillin that is on your head, which is tied at the back of your head, there are two bands. The one band goes down on the left side of your body, and the other band goes down on the right side of your body. The band on the left side of your body goes to your heart. The band on the right side of your body goes to your liver. On the box that is on your forehead, there is both a shin, which is a shalom, and on the other side is a mystical shin, and a mystical shin is a shin that has 4 arms. Those 4 arms represent tongues of fire. Why it would represent tongues of fire for people who don't accept Shavuot with Peter, I don't know. But what he said is that when God rests on your mind controls your emotions, which are in your liver. And your mind, through your emotions, then controls your liver, because that is the site of your lusts. So this means that when your mind is controlled by the Spirit controls your emotions, and your emotions control your lust. And then the other black box is up against your heart on your left arm, and that actually is, it actually says that your deeds are controlled out of your emotions. And listen to this, your emotions are controlled by your mind is controlled by the Spirit controls your emotions, and your emotions control your deeds. So that is what the whole meaning of all of these boxes are. So when it says that, and this is the number of the beast, 666 is its number, because it's the number of man. There is a mystical mystery in that as well, because 6 is the number of man. We all know that. And in Hebrew, when you say a thing 3 times, when you say it once, you state it. When you say it a second time, you state it with emphasis. And when you state it a third time, you state it with great emphasis. So if it says man, 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 it says man with great emphasis. So that means that the mark of the beast will arise when man has arisen to the best of his ability. And every man, through all the ages, could arise to the best of his ability. And therefore, every man who does not have the Spirit rest on him to control his mind, to control his emotions, his lusts, and his deeds, guess what? He carries the number 666. And if you carry these prerequisites under control of the Spirit, you carry the number 777. And when you really mature, because that is the number of the Messiah, and when you really mature, you carry the number 888, because 8 is the number of the Spirit. It's the number of the spiritual realm, the number of the day of circumcision. Not that I'm saying that circumcision should be done, it should certainly be not. But all of this ties into understanding what 666 is about, and it has everything to do with a very mystical Jewish thing. But I just told that to you because it's interesting.